microphone's live now. Thanks for asking. So this will be a brief recap of the ASPO USA conference about a little less than 1 month ago in Sacramento, California. So this was our 4th annual peak oil conference. We've consistently been lucky or successful in attracting about 500 or more attendees each year and financially doing break even or a little better sometimes. We get attendees about evenly split between local, the state, and national and international participants. One consistent problem we find, and I'm sure you find that here also, is it's difficult getting serious and extensive media coverage, whether it's local or national or international media coverage. We've been very lucky in getting the Wall Street Journal and Reuters at various conferences, and that aspect of it's getting better. 2008, of course, brought a lot more interest in peak oil from the point of view of energy prices skyrocketing. And now that oil in particular is down back around $70, we're concerned, and we all should be concerned that a certain complacency sets in and suddenly people think there's no issue with energy or peak oil. So it was a heck of a week. Every day as we were giving our attendees new peak oil information, there was a new financial disaster in the headlines. Our personal pensions or 401k plans were imploding. Well, the world's biggest banks, investment houses, and insurance companies were either going bankrupt or getting bailed out or merging with somebody or other around the world. And that provoked and motivated many of us to start asking some important questions. What is the relationship between what's going down now in the financial world and what we know about energy and peak oil? And a lot of smart bloggers and some of the people here today have tried to address that question. For example, last night it was revealed that Colin Campbell himself was actually describing this sort of a scenario 10 years ago. And the fact that there was expected to be a long and undulating plateau of oil supply, very great price volatility before entering terminal decline of oil production. And in what you can see, the actual data shows we've been essentially flat with undulations on a plateau since mid-2005. The price has been extremely volatile, going from around $30 to $147 and now back to $70. Remember that it was $10 back in 1998. 10 years ago, oil was $10 a barrel, US dollars. So a lot of things are happening that sort of set the background. In the year 2008 alone, $1 trillion will flow from OECD and other importing nations to the Middle Eastern nations, to OPEC. This is one of the most massive flows of wealth in history. U.S. consumers are debt in part in reaction to these extreme oil prices, and so they're tapped out. They can't borrow anymore, and their spending is going down, and we all are pretty much convinced we're entering a recession, which may be deep and long. Some of the consequences have been discussed here today, and it's worth bearing in mind that where credit and debt and borrowing are concerned, which particularly is the case for many big projects, whether you're renewable energy or nuclear power plants, that money's suddenly become very, very hard to come by and perhaps impossible. Credit's dried up. Rigs are hard to get. Matt Simmons constantly makes this case that drilling rigs are in short supply. Very few companies are making new ones at the rate they're needed, and the rest of the infrastructure is crumbling. We may have to revisit the oil mega projects outlook, Chris Grabowski's project, because future production estimates may have to be revised due to cancellations and postponements. We may have seen the all-time production peak in 2008. Excuse me. Matt Simmons, I'll jump into Matt Simmons because he tied the financial crisis and the peak oil crisis together. He said the meltdown of the financial system should cause us to relook at the energy supply and transportation system. It's very large, it's very complex, and now we have firsthand evidence how a very complex system that, in fact, is so complex there's no one person on the planet who understands how it all works, can suddenly collapse of its own weight and complexity when small things, accumulation of things start going wrong. Simmons does the calculation. He says, what happens if everybody decided to top off their gasoline tanks in the United States? This is equivalent to a run on the energy bank, where the bank is the stored supply of gasoline in North America. And you do the calculations, you find that you can pretty much run down all the supplied gas, or the majority of the supplied gasoline, in storage in a few days. And if there was a panic, this is what could happen. And suddenly you have stations all around the country shut down, no gas. The global energy system, you all know this already, is very vulnerable to acts of God, namely weather, terrorism, and simple infrastructure breakdowns. So it can, there are many choke points geographically as well as logistically. In OPEC nations, of course, we have very poor openness, no transparency, so there's very bad or missing information. The recent collapse in oil prices is also creating a false sense of security. This is something we're all becoming aware of and hope to allay with our outreach efforts to beyond the peak oil community. Simmons says we're flying blind into a Category 6 hurricane. Peak oil is the greatest risk of the 21st century. Now, so what we actually did, Sunday we had 2 sets of sessions. These were triple tracks, so everybody had to make a personal decision what to attend. Reporting the peak oil story was Neil King from the Wall Street Journal, a woman from the San Francisco Chronicle, and several other reporters. We also had an investing forum, analysis from the oil drum 1 and 2, and then I participated in scenario planning for state and local government. This is a project I'm doing with the state of Massachusetts legislature right now, and it's underway with several other states. Resource nationalism and net exports, Jim Buckey. This is one of the most, in my opinion, most unreported aspects of peak oil, and every importing country needs to know about this and pay a lot of attention to it, because that decline, as you know, the net exports are running down a lot faster than the total global production. Big questions on Gawar and Middle East. The decline rates in those countries and other exporting countries makes a huge difference. There's a huge difference, obviously, between 3 or 4% and 5 or 6% declines. Excuse me. Demand rising 1.5% a year. Big oil controls only a small percentage, 6% of world reserves. The nationalized oil companies are supplying domestic demand first, maintaining domestic tranquility. Therefore, the exports are getting squeezed between rising internal consumption and the flat or declining production in most cases, and that just gets slammed shut. And we see, for example, Mexico probably ceasing to be an exporter within 4 to 5 years. Jeff Rubin talked about the high energy costs and globalization, also the economist Herman Franzen, and making the point that shipping costs have tripled in recent years. We see the prospect of reverse globalization, or some people call it localization, relocalization, U.S. steel production actually rising, the cost of transporting that steel round trip across the country, across the sea to Asia is getting a big chunk of the overall cost. Andy Weissman is an expert on particularly natural gas and LNG. He's looking ahead, saying prices may moderate for a few years. Beyond that, we see ourselves getting into a natural gas supply crunch. There is finally, this will impact electricity production around the country in many parts of the world. U.S. imports of LNG, which was once going to save our butts, is now actually declining because it's getting called for. Those LNG tankers can turn direction anytime out to whoever's paying the highest bucks for a shipment. There's no overall national energy policy. Now he was talking about U.S. national in this case. Far greater sense of urgency. This is he's advocating. Replace the EIA, create a National Energy Security Supply Board, develop comprehensive strategy, make intelligence, not not ideological decisions, and we're running out of time. Jim Puplava, yeah, we're heading into a recession, debt tsunami, looking at Social Security and Medicare, Medicaid, plus payment of the national debt, $70 trillion obligation. David Friendly, Vince Matthews did a wonderful report. China, as you know, adding 105 gigawatts. This is more than the entire production of the UK, for example, all in 1 year. It's nearly all coal-fired. They wiped out the entire Europe Kyoto commitment by 2012 at the rate that China's building new coal plants. This is a global problem if we're concerned about climate change, global warming. This was, I think, this was Vince Matthews' world energy consumption chart, which you see tripling over in the space of about 25 years. Vince Matthews has a wonderful plot here you may have seen. This is just a portion of it that I assembled, but he's got 15 commodities shown and how the prices on all of them have jumped anywhere from 200 to 2,000% in the last 2 years. Now, recently, the news is many of these same commodities are beginning to decline based on perceptions or anticipation of a global recession. But we don't know, obviously, how far that's going to go. But it's a real eye-opening chart, 15 key commodities for our industrialized future. Visions of post-peak future. This was a really funny and touching on-stage assembly of Richard Brennan, a moderator with a huge sense of humor, Randy Udall, who many of you know, James Howard Kunstler, who many of you also know and may enjoy or dislike reading his daily blogs or weekly blogs, and Dennis Hayes, finally the founder of Earth Day. Questions came up: are we nearing peak stupidity? Are we on the verge of peak democracy and it's downhill from here? Can the world support 9 billion people? Can people and religions get along? Now, if you know Jim Kunstler's personality and how he doesn't suffer fools gladly, you can only imagine him linking arms with the other people on stage and singing Kumbaya. And this actually happened. The picture of tequila on the stage might have had something to do with it, but it was a lot of fun. Inconvenient Truths on Coal, David Hughes, who's an exceptional reporter on the scene, particularly with Canada and coal, and also natural gas. Human population, energy consumption, a very strong correlation for the last 500 plus years. 2/3 of remaining fossil fuels, if you sum it all up, is in the form of coal. Carbon sequestration is something that is only been attempted in a few what I'd call science projects, experiments, a few small-scale demo plants, one in Norway. There's huge obstacles to scaling this up. The capital cost of these is going to be a huge obstacle. Energy use to implement carbon capture and sequestration is something on the order of 25%, and that's going to be a real stumbling block. Companies will not do that, in my opinion, until there's a gun to their heads with recriminations for not complying with some law. Robert Rapier talked about biofuels. Corn ethanol is a bridge fuel. He calls it a bridge to nowhere. Most people know the story on that. Sugarcane to ethanol works well in Brazil, but it will not translate or scale to U.S. There's orders of magnitude difference. Cellulosic ethanol, in various labs, people have been working on this for about 40 years. They haven't proved it yet at a commercial, economical, profitable industrial scale. Algae to biofuel. Robert Rapier is a very, very smart guy, and he works on this stuff his whole career, and I think he knows what he's talking about. Biofuels won't save us. That's his conclusion. They will only contribute a tiny % to liquid fuel. We need non-pandering politicians, aggressive conservation and efficiency, mass transit, solar hot water, among other things. I'll try to make this fast. Global LNG prices are near parity with oil. LNG, unlike some expectations, is not proving a panacea for energy shortages in many countries. and it's replacing oil in some instances. In the U.S., gas shale plays are coming, but they are expensive to produce. Overall low production. It's not clear how well they'll scale up. And these tend to be small fields, so they deplete rapidly. So we may get a bump in, we're seeing a bump now in U.S. and North American natural gas production. It's not clear how long that'll last. This was a special report on carbon capture and sequestration. Peak oil and climate change. This is a topic that I think deservedly got a lot of attention at our conference, and it's always been a sort of natural tension between these two competing issues for our attention and for the world's attention. Randy Udall makes the point that carbon emissions are rising exponentially, but the IPCC, for example, they have 20-something scenarios, and nearly all of these scenarios have grossly unrealistic projections of available fossil fuels. Randy, in particular, studied this at some length. I've talked with a guy from the U.S. Climate Change Program Office, a guy named Peter Hughes, and what I was asking this guy is, what would it take to get some peak oil aware people like those in the audience here and our presenters today in the same room with those IPCC scientists who make these projections? And Peter said, send me an email. So I'm composing that now, and we're going to try to see if we can get some progress on this. So, and part of the problem is we're getting mixed messages from the climate change proponents. Jim Hansen now is going around saying, we've got to go back to 350 parts per million. Well, by the way, we passed that milestone 25 years ago. So we should be pulling carbon out of the air now to get back to that. EIA business as usual scenario says we're heading for a 60-degree C rise. Al Gore is saying 3 degrees C is more than we can tolerate, and 550 parts per million. So there's some mixed messages there that tend to confuse not only peak oil folks, but the general and less educated audience out there that is competing for the attention from peak oil folks. Yeah. So should peak oil, should we be working to push peak oil as more important or more critical than climate change? And it seems a consensus of people that were presenting in Sacramento was that yes, we should say this is going to hit our industrialized civilization faster and harder than climate change. And when there is less available energy, which is what happens when we're on the downside of the Hubbard's peak oil curve, then you have less energy and presumably less economic capital as well to do the things you may want to do as far as responding to climate change. So one way of putting it is peak oil, this is my opinion, is a greater near-term problem between immediately, that is now, and 40 years out. And global warming is a greater long-term problem. In the solution space, fortunately, there are a lot of things that we all say and that they share in common. That is efficiency, conservation, and renewable. There's just no doubts that that's what we should be doing. I'll pass through all those. Okay, so these are references. You can pull down complete and detailed descriptions from the oil drum, and I want to thank the oil drum folks. Some are here and others didn't come to this conference, for getting those out very promptly and rapidly. Steve Ballo had 3 days of observations on the Sacramento conference. And finally, Chris, it's not on here, Chris Nelder also had a quite thorough, it's a 57-page PDF file of his notes from the Sacramento conference. So I'll just say one thing, what we're working on for next year. There is a possibility of a joint conference, ASPO International and ASPO USA. This is not a commitment, this is something we are exploring, and we may be able to say more about that tomorrow. Thanks very much.